Hey everyone, welcome to episode 13 of Open Books with Alana and Erin, two female leaders modernizing the accounting space. Today we are talking about a new term for me,
Yeah.
codependency leadership.
Yep.
It is something that I have definitely
Yep.
experienced, but have just recently heard the term.
Yeah.
Definitely want to talk about it as it's very easy for servant leaders to
Yep.
start transitioning to a codependent leadership situation. So let's hop on in. We'll talk about what it is since I had to learn that, how to avoid it in the future, and all of that.
Yeah.
Alana, what
Yep.
is codependent leadership?
So I think when a lot of people hear the word codependent, they think about substance abuse, or your head might go to, the term that's thrown around when you're in high school, and it's that like can't live without you type of love, right? Like,
Yes.
oh, they're so codependent. And yes, codependency does cover those things, but codependency covers so much more. And when it comes to codependency in leadership, it's really that desire and that need to have your team need you. You're not able to allow them to be totally independent. There's that level of almost of kind of a micromanaging view of like, I need to oversee, come to me with any decisions. It's that attachment that you can't let go of. Other factors that play into it are you can't give your team effective, constructive feedback for fear of how they'll feel. Like that inability to make someone anything other than happy.
Yeah.
Those type of leaders struggle with that, and we'll dive into why that's incredibly harmful for you, for your team, for your firm in a little bit. But when you think about codependency leadership and where it kind of plays into or how it plays with servant leadership, you can really view servant leadership as our North Star, hopefully your North Star if you're listening to this. And on one side is that management out of fear where you don't get feedback from anyone, it's your way or the highway, you're really running it as a party of one. And so then servant leadership's in the middle, and then on the other side we have codependent leadership where you are so attached to your team, their feelings dictate how you lead, and you're not able to give feedback to them. And so it's really on this spectrum, and we just want to talk about what those traits are, why it's so detrimental, so that you can kind of continue to self-guide yourself and us as well, so that you can stay in that sweet spot of servant leadership,
Right.
which is where we all really want to be.
Definitely.
Yeah.
To me, like I said, this was a new term, but once I dug into it, I was like, oh, I recognize all of this.
Yeah.
So it then became very familiar. But I do think there's a bit of a bit of history that comes with codependent leaders.
Yeah.
Those that weren't necessarily doing fear-based leadership, but being codependent and being needed, that need to be needed.
Yeah.
Back when in my first entry into the accounting space, I remember talking with my colleagues at the time, and I was, very green.
Yeah.
And they all talked about how they did this one thing, and that was like their job security. So like
yeah.
they wanted people to come to them to ask them. They handled it because it meant that they were needed. Their jobs were secure. And I have taken a total shift on that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, that means I'm never going to grow.
Yes.
If I am always the person that is answering these questions.
Yep.
And that was definitely a mind shift a while ago, but I think it's still very prevalent in the accounting space, or kind of across all generations, I would say, of that, like, oh, if I know how to do this one thing or multiple things, or I lead this one team,
Yeah.
and everyone comes to me, I am needed. I am essential to the business.
Yep.
My job is safe. And I think that's it's still there, but I think
Yes.
the actual reality of that is less.
Yeah.
So definitely something like I said, something I now have a name to
Yeah.
to put to.
Exactly.
But why is this style of leadership so harmful to our teams?
Yeah, and I think you started to touch on it a little bit is, I mean, the biggest piece I see is that inability to give effective feedback. I mean, just stifles growth for yourself, your team, and the firm. Feedback is a critical component of growth, evolving, challenging yourself. And if
Yeah.
leaders, that is a responsibility of leaders to give effective feedback. And if they can't and won't simply because they're fearful of their team, I mean, that's just so detrimental, and it's just going to stagnate
Right.
anything associated with that. What I also see is it is a very fast track to burning out leaders.
Ooh, yeah.
Because like we touched on, that inability to kind of pull yourself out, we all have teams and they have to fulfill functions that we can no longer fulfill, whether it's things you give up, things you delegate, or just additional duties that you're not able to take on. We can't do it all. If we could, we wouldn't have teams, right? And so part of it, if you're not letting anything go out the door without having your stamp on it or without having some critical piece of your knowledge, you are going to get burnt out so fast.
Yep.
It's just not feasible. I also put this in relation to, we just passed the tax deadline a couple weeks
Yes.
ago, and there's a lot of talk around depression for CPAs in the sense that they work such a condensed period of time at such a fast pace.
Right.
You know, for the first couple months of the year, when that deadline passes, so many of them go into a really hard headspace. And a lot of what they found is that's because they no longer have someone needing them. They no
Right.
longer have that structure. There's a lot of other reasons why, but a large component of it is that being needed piece.
Right.
And that's part of that codependency of you're needing to be needed by your clients or by other people. And so when that all literally stops on the deadline and the light switch flips and you don't have that, you lose a sense of who you are.
Right.
Because you've been so dependent on that work.
That's so true. And like I have felt it before.
Yeah.
You have.
Yes.
Anyone who goes from everyone,
Yes.
all of the communication and the
Yep.
need, and you feel valued at that
Yep.
point
Yeah.
because people need you.
Yep.
But it is so detrimental to your mental health, physical health, everything, and so easy to drop into that really bad depression afterwards.
Yep, it totally is. It's a scary place to be. Yep.
Oof. Rough.
Yeah. What do you see as detrimental when you're thinking about
For the
codependent?
team?
Yeah.
So definitely guilty of like all of these. But I have to look at my little notes. I think the biggest thing that I had a hard time with letting go is letting the team members fail.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Because we learn so much from failing.
Yes.
But at the same time, I know what it's like to fail. I don't want my team member to
know.
experience that. But
Yep.
sometimes failure has to happen.
Yep.
And I used to try to avoid failure at all times with
Yeah.
the team. Like, what support can I be? What can I do? I can do this. I can do this. And
Yep.
eventually I realized that's not helping anyone.
Right.
It's not helping them. They're getting a helping hand in maybe what they need on their day-to-day, but it's not actually helping them succeed.
Right.
It's just kind of propping up it with like toothpicks.
Yep.
And then it'll all come crumbling down. So I have found that by letting the team members fail while being supportive,
Sure. Yeah.
is important.
Yep.
And I need to let that happen. It's so hard.
Yes.
Probably the hardest lesson I've learned
Yeah.
in leadership. And then, as we've talked about in prior episodes, I am so bad at boundaries. So, it's a work in progress. But setting boundaries
Yep.
and, making sure everyone knows them, letting the team members set their own boundaries
Right.
and respecting those. If there are no boundaries and it's just kind of a free for all,
Yep.
that's bad for everyone.
Yep.
I'm going to burn out.
Yeah,
They're going to
they're
burn
gonna
out.
burn
It's
out.
just going to be, they aren't going to grow. And most people want to grow.
Yep.
I think the other side is depending on the team members, because everyone's different. Some team members become very complacent
Sure.
with codependent leadership.
Yep.
And others get frustrated because they aren't growing.
Yeah.
But then you have some that are like, oh, if this is how it is, I'll just be here doing my job. But then, like, they don't necessarily see promotions or
Exactly.
raises or
Yep.
anything. And then they're frustrated and wonder why. And it's like, well, there's complacency there. But really, that complacency was put in place by that leader. You're kind of
Yep.
setting that person up to
Yep.
not succeed.
Yep.
So I think it really depends on us and how we manage our team and learning every day from it. But
Yep.
the letting the team fail is the hardest one
Yeah.
for sure.
That's really hard. And when you spoke to your last point about that complacency and then the employee not seeing the promotions,
Right.
and maybe the bonuses or something, I think what that also leads to is, so you as a leader, you're not telling them why they're not getting
Yeah.
promotions because you don't want to make them unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not giving them that feedback and telling them why. So then you have to start to say, well, the firm or well, the business,
Yeah.
the leaders, won't give you a promotion. And so it really, I think, quickly turns into almost a pitting of the employee
Yes.
against where they work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really just creates a lot of confusion
Yes.
for that employee and
Yeah.
also the other leaders, because they're like, man, just tell this employee, like, grow here, challenge yourself
Mhm.
here, and you'll start seeing that. But you can't when you're
Yeah.
in that headspace.
Yeah.
And when you talked about that failing, I think that's such a huge piece of it.
Mhm.
Is we don't want to see our employees fail, and that can sometimes be where they grow the most.
Yes.
And so not allowing them to fail is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
But failure is needed to
Yeah.
grow.
I mean, I look back at when I failed, and that
Yep.
was by far the most learning
Yeah.
I did in my career was when
Agreed.
I failed. And other people should get to experience that themselves. Because it really drives home a lot of the, like, if it's a client service failure, it drives home why these things are important. Not that we want our teams failing,
Right.
just acknowledging that it is a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
And failure is sometimes it has to happen
Yeah.
to succeed.
Yep.
Which is so weird.
Yeah. Yes. Failure for success.
Yeah. So what are some safeguards that you have put in place in kind of your day-to-day to identify when you might be developing codependent
Yeah.
relationship there, or if you see it in other people?
I think for me, one of the biggest things, and I think this goes for so many things, but specifically to identify if you're in a codependent leadership style, is that self-awareness. It, especially when you're the sole leader of your team, right, which is what a leader is,
Yeah.
you may not always have somebody else in the room in those moments when it's like, here's where you would give your team feedback. If you're choosing not to, nobody's really going to know for a while, right? Until it really starts to snowball into an issue. But leading up to it kind of exploding, the traits that you have are really identified by you. And so I think so much of it is understanding if things are tough and you're, not in the best trait that you want to be in, identifying that and calling yourself on it, I think is really important. What I would also say is if you are on a leadership journey or want to start on a leadership journey, wherever you're at, there are various roles that I would say you should find in other people, various mentorship roles. And if one of those is not someone to call you on your shit and tell you when you can do better, you need to find that.
Yes.
Because while I say self-awareness is, the best thing you can have, there's times where that's just not feasible. So having someone else to tell you, when you need to change course is really important.
Yeah.
We will hopefully have an episode on the mentors and the roles that
Yeah.
you should find on your leadership journey. So that's just one of them I would recommend. But that, I think, changes your course of being a leader when you can find someone to identify, hey, you have some bad tendencies here. Like, let's turn it around. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Being receptive too, I would say, is
good point.
We talk about being self-aware and all of that, but when you have this mentor actually being receptive to hearing these things, because they are personal traits, it can be so easy to take that as an attack. And I think being open and understanding that we are not perfect, we have things we can work on, is super important in that mentor relationship. Sarah is my call me on my bullshit person, and she did it this week. It was good. I mean, for a certain level of good. But similar. So I try, like, when I'm working with my team and setting up safeguards, also being self-aware of what I'm doing, where I know my past pitfalls have been. Like, I know I failed on this 3 months ago because of how I set this person up. I need to really be aware of what I'm doing, how I'm saying things, and acknowledging that is important. So when I'm trying to having some maybe constructive criticism or, feedback for a team member, I always keep in the back of my mind, is this going to help them succeed? So that kind of turns the negative feedback from coming from a place of negativity to a place of I'm helping them succeed. And just that little switch in my brain allows me to feel better about it and verbalize it. Whereas, like, giving feedback, especially if it's about something that went wrong, is not easy. It's not fun. But I have found if I just switch that viewpoint, like, okay, it's for the better. It's for everyone to be better, including myself. I'm okay to have this conversation. Because it can be so stressful having that bad interaction, and you never know how it's going to be taken. And so for me, that's my biggest safeguard that I have.
I like the way you frame that in your mind too, because I think when we talk about safeguards, and I talked about that spectrum of fear-based, servant and then codependency, I think it can be so easy to kind of swing the other way and, well, they said give effective feedback, like open the floodgates kind of. And I think your comment of, will this make them successful, probably put safeguards on both ends of that, so that you are giving the feedback that's needed, but you are refraining from carrying that emotion to them if it's not effective, and sticking to, here's the feedback that you need. I don't need to pile on for you. And so I think that creates a really nice middle, I would say.
I hope so.
Yeah, I like that.
Definitely learning as we go, but definitely have found if I keep that as my North Star in those conversations, they seem to go better. Even just from the words that I'm choosing as I talk to them. If I come from that mindset, it just seems to work better. Still uncomfortable.
Totally.
But I feel better about it.
Well, and I think even probably receiving feedback, like we talked about with the mentor, when they can call you on your shit. If you just keep in mind, like, because feedback it can be very hard to receive. So I think it, it matters how it's being delivered, but then also just remembering like, okay, this is to make me to make me successful. They care enough and want to see me succeed that they are providing this feedback for me. So I think probably even taking some sort of spin of that in receiving feedback is beneficial as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, I like that.
So, what have you recently learned about from your team or about your team, specifically in regard to the codependency leadership?
Yeah, for codependency. So to be fair, my mentor told me about codependency leadership, just in the sense that like servant leadership kind of dances around some of the aspects of it. And so I knew what codependency was like at a personal level, but then I never considered applying that into leadership. And so when he brought forward that idea, it was like, holy cow, like, of course, there'd be a leadership attribute to it. So to be fair, learned that from one of my team members on my team anyway. But what I've separately learned about codependency with my team is with codependency, you almost always have to be the smartest in the room because you need that level of, well, they can't do this without me. I have this critical piece of knowledge that nothing will move on without hearing from me. And I think you have to put your ego aside and allow yourself to not be the smartest in the room, but also understand that the smartest person in the room may be one of your team members. And that can be hard as a leader. But that just means they're continuing to learn and grow, and they are helping you that much more to not burn out because you've got someone who's kind of leading the charge. So I've really learned that allowing others to be the smartest in the room, especially those from my team, is what servant leadership is all about. Yeah. What about you? What have you learned?
So this is a recent thing.
Right.
I have that need to be needed very much.
Yep.
I have been working on it and trying to get to the point, especially as we've had promotions in the firm and trying to like bring up the next level of leaders. So I went on vacation for a week.
We love that.
And I was good-ish I checked my email at the end of each day so I could delete all the spam.
Fair.
Because I did not want to come back to 500 spam emails.
Yep.
And for the whole week, I kept myself only responding to 2 client emails.
Good.
I was so proud of myself.
Yes.
Sarah did call me on it, though.
Okay.
She's like, I saw you respond to this. You were not supposed to. I'm like, I know. As soon as I hit send, I realized you could see it.
You were copied.
Yeah. But what I learned from the team is they are at a point, which made me very proud. So I kind of feel braggy. But they did not message me on Slack at all.
Yeah.
Which on one hand, I'm like, well, did they not need me? Am I like,
miss me?
Yeah. What? And so dealing with that is very hard. That FOMO, feel of missing out. But the fact that they were able to either resolve any things that they had come up or be aware enough to know like, okay, this is something that can wait until next week or we can resolve it now. Like the fact that they felt comfortable doing that and reaching out to other leaders in the team made me so happy.
That's great.
While also feeling a little sad.
Yeah.
But it was a like bittersweet, like, oh, they're growing up.
Yeah.
So it taught me a little bit about myself.
Good.
And that I'm happy with where the team has been going.
Yeah.
Made me feel that we made the right decisions about who we were promoting and everything. So, little bittersweet, but very, very happy about it.
Well, and they probably got to that place faster than if you would have continued to like, hey, just checking in.
Yeah.
Like, do you need anything from me? If you would have had some of those codependency traits in reaching out to them, you know, and kind of placing yourself, you know, in the day, they would have still had you to rely on where you were able to
step away.
Right, and only apply couple
Yeah.
times, which is great, but able to step away, and so they were able to show you that they can do it on their own,
Yeah.
which is really great.
It was, bittersweet.
I know.
It's that
Yeah.
whole growing up thing.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, our team ranges from like early 20s
Yeah.
to 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they aren't kids,
No.
but I don't have any kids myself. This is them growing up.
That's them. Yep, I totally get that. Yeah.
What would you tell yourself about the codependency leadership earlier in your career?
Yeah.
What would you share?
Well, what I would tell myself back then is that your leadership style takes shape of your personality traits. That's just the way it is. And so the ways in which we build and grow relationships in our personal life is going to be the way that we're going to carry that into work. And I think, there's the saying of like, to have a great relationship, you need to be your best self. In speaking about, usually it's in reference to marriage. So to have the best relationship, you have to be your best self. I tend to believe that about leadership as well, that to be the best leader you can possibly be for your team, you need to be the best version of yourself. And truly, you can only hide your unhealthy coping mechanisms and tendencies for so long. And things are stressful at work, and stress brings out the worst of those. And so if you're not able to resolve those in your personal life as a whole, and find better ways to work through things, they're going to come out at work. And they're going to cut you at the knees.
Yeah.
And they're going to hinder your growth as a leader.
Yes.
And so my advice has been, always will be, to new leaders and to myself is, as you're starting on your leadership journey, if there's anything that a trait that you're like, oh, I know I have this, work on it, challenge yourself and try to do better in that regard so that, you can flourish as a leader.
Yeah.
Don't let yourself and those unhealthy mechanisms hold you back, because they will.
Yeah. That is one of my most favorite phrases or things that you have said throughout our podcast journey.
Yeah.
Your unhealthy coping mechanisms will present themselves because it is stressful.
Yep.
And it's so true.
Yeah.
No matter how much we want to think it's not going to happen to us, it does.
Yep.
And I love it. That was one of my favorites.
You truly can only hide it for so long, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. What would you tell yourself?
So I've kind of mentioned I have that need of being needed very badly, and I have always throughout my career, throughout my working life, not just my accounting career, have always tied my self-worth to that, am I needed?
Sure.
And I would tell myself to start working on that early on.
Okay.
Your self-worth is not dictated by how many clients or team members, or just the firm in general, how much that needs you.
Yeah.
Your self-worth is not tied to that at all and shouldn't be.
Yep.
But I have always, and still do, even though I'm working on it, still tie my self-worth to that. And so when things, when I need it, it feeds that, and I get satisfaction out of it.
Yeah.
But I also get satisfaction out of when my team succeeds. So I've been trying to lean into that.
Oh, sure.
Okay, I know I get satisfied when I'm needed.
Yep.
I feel fulfilled.
Yep.
But this is the better way to be fulfilled. So don't lean on that crutch.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I would tell myself. Start that journey earlier.
Yeah.
Earlier on. Because your self-worth is not if you're needed at work.
Yep. Yeah.
But that was still something I'm learning.
Well, and I think so much of that too is find something outside of work.
Yes.
So that your sole mission. We all love our job.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us do. Many.
Many.
That was a broad statement. Many people really like their job, and I, for one, and I will not apologize about that. I love the hell out of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I love who I do it for and who I do it with.
Yes.
I'm so passionate about it, and you are too.
Yes.
With that said, we have things outside of work that we
Yes.
value just as much and probably a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a really well-rounded
Mhm.
leader, employee,
Yep.
and that's what we want, right? Is just to be, have something outside of life
Mhm.
or outside of work that allows you to see the value
Right.
is more than just what you're doing
Mhm.
from 8 to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is hard,
It's so hard though.
but
Yep.
very, very good.
Yep. Totally.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add?
I don't have anything else.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us on today's episode of Open Books. We hope that by bringing forward the lessons that we've learned along the way during our times in the accounting industry, that others can learn from us and share in our journey to evolve as leaders in the accounting space. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.